Christopher James, heir to a vast fortune from the pharmaceutical industry, lived a life of luxury and privilege that many could only dream of. However, he was tired of being seen only as a winning lottery ticket. At social events, in the highest circles of society, he was often approached by people more interested in his bank account than his true personality. This constant harassment and superficiality left him disillusioned and lonely. Determined to find genuine love, someone who loved him for who he was and not for what he possessed, Christopher decided to make a radical decision: disguise himself as an ordinary man and seek temporary employment. He knew this was the only way to see the world with different eyes and be seen by others from a more authentic perspective. After days of reflection and planning, Christopher decided to apply as a volunteer at the New Orleans Music Festival. This annual event not only attracted musical talents from all over the country, but was also a meeting point for people from different backgrounds and stories. For him, it seemed the perfect setting for his quest for authenticity. On a sunny spring morning, Christopher arrived at the festival's organizing office. Dressed in simple clothes and carrying a worn-out backpack, he introduced himself as Chris, an ordinary man looking for a temporary job opportunity. "Good morning, I'm Chris. I'm here to apply as a volunteer for the festival," he said with a friendly smile. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with an attentive look, raised her eyes to him and smiled back. "Sure, Chris. We need all the help we can get. Here is the application form. Fill it out and bring it back to me." As Christopher filled out the form, he observed his surroundings. The atmosphere was lively, with people walking back and forth, discussing details, and making final preparations for the event. He felt a growing excitement, eager to dive into this new experience. Shortly after submitting the form, he was directed to the logistics area, where he met his supervisor, Tom, a robust man with a thick mustache and a contagious laugh. "So, you're Chris, right? Welcome to the team. We'll need you to help set up the stages and organize the sound equipment," said Tom, firmly shaking Christopher's hand. "I'm eager to get started. I'm here to help with whatever is needed," Christopher replied determinedly. That same day, while carrying boxes of equipment to the main stage, Christopher noticed a young talented woman rehearsing a theatrical scene in the corner of the stage. Her movements were graceful, and her voice, full of emotion, echoed through the environment. He was intrigued and captivated by the intensity of her performance. During a break, Christopher had the opportunity to talk to her. "Hi, I'm Chris. I saw you rehearsing and was impressed by your performance. You're amazing." The young woman smiled shyly and replied, "Thank you, Chris. I'm Sarah Thompson. I'm a performing arts student, and I'm participating in the festival to try to win a scholarship." "A scholarship? That's amazing. It seems like you really put your heart into everything you do," said Christopher, admiringly. Sarah sighed and explained, "Yes, this scholarship could transform my life. I come from a humble family, and this is my chance to study at a prestigious art school." Sarah's sincerity and passion deeply touched Christopher. He was determined to learn more about this talented and genuine young woman. In the days that followed, they began working together on various tasks, from organizing the backstage to preparing the stages for the performances. One afternoon, while organizing the dressing rooms, Sarah confided in Christopher about her ex-boyfriend, Nathan. "He leads one of the competing bands, and our relationship ended badly. Nathan still holds grudges and is willing to do anything to win the festival, including sabotaging my performance." Christopher, concerned, looked Sarah in the eyes. "Don't worry, Sarah. I'll be here to support you and help you face whatever he tries to do. You're not alone." Sarah smiled, feeling comforted by Christopher's words. "Thank you, Chris. Your company and support mean a lot to me." As the days passed, the chemistry between Christopher and Sarah became increasingly evident. They laughed together, shared stories, and discovered new facets of each other. Sarah was enchanted by Christopher's dedication and humility, without suspecting his true identity. For Christopher, Sarah's authenticity and generosity were a breath of fresh air in his life. One evening, while walking backstage after a long day of work, Sarah revealed more about her dreams and hopes. "I've always dreamed of using art to inspire people and make a difference in the world. This scholarship is my opportunity to fulfill that dream." Touched by Sarah's passion, Christopher responded, "I believe in you, Sarah. You have incredible talent and admirable determination. I'm sure you'll make it." As the festival approached, the tension between Christopher and Nathan increased. Nathan did everything to emotionally destabilize Sarah, but Christopher was always by her side, ready to intervene and protect her. During one of the rehearsals, Nathan caused a scene, trying to humiliate Sarah in front of everyone. "You'll never win this scholarship, Sarah. You don't have what it takes," said Nathan sarcastically. Furious, Christopher intervened. "Leave her alone, Nathan. She has more talent and courage than you will ever have." The two men had a heated argument, attracting the attention of other participants and journalist Mark Hunter, who was in New Orleans following a lead on unethical practices in the pharmaceutical industry. Mark began to observe Christopher more closely, suspecting there was more to his story than met the eye. Despite the adversities, Christopher and Sarah continued to work together, strengthening their bond and facing the challenges with courage and determination. Christopher felt he had finally found someone who loved him for who he was, not for what he possessed. And Sarah, inspired by Christopher's sincerity and support, was more determined than ever to achieve her dream. During the festival preparations, Christopher and Sarah were assigned to work together on various tasks, from setting up the stages to organizing the backstage. The constant proximity allowed them to get to know each other better, and the chemistry between them was undeniable. Christopher, with his new identity as an ordinary man, was determined to maintain his disguise, but he couldn't help being attracted to Sarah's authenticity and passion for music and the arts. One morning, while adjusting the stage lights, Sarah casually commented, "You seem so dedicated to this job, Chris. I've never seen anyone so committed to a temporary job like you." Christopher smiled, looking at her attentively. "I think it's important to do well whatever we set out to do, no matter what it is. And you? You seem so passionate about what you do. Where does all this energy come from?" Sarah laughed, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "Music and the arts are my life. I have the chance to win a scholarship that could change everything for me. I'm giving my all for it." As the days passed, Christopher's admiration for Sarah only grew. He saw her rehearsing tirelessly, always with a smile on her face, even when the fatigue was evident. One particularly hot afternoon, while taking a brief break, Sarah sat next to Christopher on one of the sound boxes. "Can I ask you something, Chris?" she said, looking at him curiously. "Sure. Ask whatever you want," he replied, feeling a twinge of anxiety. "I know everyone here has their stories, but yours seems a bit mysterious. What brought you here? Why volunteer at a music festival?" Christopher hesitated for a moment, but maintained his improvised story. "I needed a change, something different. I've always liked music and thought it could be a good experience. And you? What brought you here besides the scholarship?" Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with old memories. "I've always loved music. I grew up in a small town and never had many opportunities. This scholarship is my chance to study at one of the best art schools in the country. It's a dream I'm chasing with all my might." Meanwhile, in another part of New Orleans, investigative journalist Mark Hunter was following a hot lead on unethical practices in the pharmaceutical industry. He had arrived in the city intending to learn more about Christopher's company and was determined to expose the truth. His instincts led him to the music festival, where he hoped to find some connection. The following night, during a community dinner offered to festival volunteers and participants, Christopher and Sarah met again. The atmosphere was light and relaxed, with laughter and animated conversations around the improvised tables. "Have you met anyone here who truly inspired you?" asked Sarah while savoring a slice of pizza. Christopher thought for a moment before answering. "Actually, yes. I met someone who showed me the true meaning of passion and dedication. Someone who doesn't let difficulties get them down and keeps fighting for their dreams." Sarah blushed slightly, realizing he was talking about her. "You're very kind, Chris. I think we all need a bit of inspiration from time to time." The days continued to pass, and the bond between Christopher and Sarah strengthened. They worked together, laughed together, and often talked late into the night about their hopes and dreams. Christopher was increasingly enchanted by Sarah's sincerity and generosity, while she was drawn to the dedication and humility he demonstrated. Meanwhile, Mark Hunter's investigations began to converge on the festival. He suspected that someone there might be linked to the pharmaceutical company he was investigating. His suspicions grew after hearing rumors about a mysterious volunteer who seemed to have a hidden past. One afternoon, while Sarah and Christopher were adjusting the sound equipment, Mark appeared at the scene, observing everything with a critical eye. He approached one of the festival organizers and asked some discreet questions, trying to get more information about the volunteers. "Do you know if any of the volunteers have an interesting story?" asked Mark, feigning disinterest. The organizer looked at him, surprised by the question. "Well, everyone here has their stories, but there's this guy, Chris. He's a bit mysterious. No one knows much about him. He arrived suddenly and has been working hard ever since." Mark thanked him and walked away, but his curiosity was more piqued than ever. He decided to observe Christopher more closely, hoping to discover something useful for his investigation. Meanwhile, Sarah and Christopher were completely unaware of Mark's growing interest. They continued to work together, sharing moments of camaraderie and mutual support. One starry night, while resting after a long day of work, Sarah looked at Christopher and said, "You know, Chris, I think I found more than I expected here. Not just a chance for my future, but also someone who really understands me." Christopher felt a wave of emotions hearing those words. He knew he was falling in love with Sarah, but he also knew that his secret could destroy everything. "I feel the same, Sarah. You are an amazing person, and I'm grateful to have met you." The festival preparations were almost complete, and the tension began to rise. Sarah was nervous about her performance, while Christopher struggled with the dilemma of whether or not to reveal his true identity. And amid all this, Mark Hunter continued his investigations, getting closer and closer to discovering the truth about Christopher. One night, while Sarah was rehearsing for her performance, Christopher watched her from afar, admiring her determination and talent. He knew he needed to tell the truth, but feared losing everything they had built together. In a moment of courage, he approached her after the rehearsal. "Sarah, I need to talk to you." "It's important," he said, trying to stay calm. She looked at him, surprised by the seriousness in his voice. "Sure, Chris. What happened?" Before he could respond, Mark Hunter appeared, interrupting the moment. "Sorry to intrude, but I need to talk to you, Chris," said Mark, looking directly at Christopher. Christopher felt his heart race. He knew that moment could change everything. "Sarah, give me a minute, please," he asked, turning to Mark. "What do you want?" Mark looked at him with a piercing gaze. "I know who you are, Christopher James, and I know what your family has been doing. We need to talk." Sarah, hearing those words, was paralyzed. She looked at Christopher, confused and hurt. "What is he saying, Chris? Who are you really?" Christopher felt a wave of panic, but knew he couldn't hide the truth anymore. "Sarah, I can explain everything. Please, give me a chance." Mark, sensing the tension in the air, decided to step back. "I'll leave you two to talk. But this isn't over, Christopher." With Mark walking away, Christopher looked at Sarah, feeling the weight of his lies. He knew he needed to be honest, but also knew he could lose the only thing that truly mattered to him. Sarah reveals to Christopher that her ex-boyfriend, Nathan, leads one of the competing bands and that their relationship ended badly. Nathan still harbors resentment and is willing to do anything to win the festival, including sabotaging Sarah's performance. Christopher promises to support Sarah and help her face Nathan while trying to keep his disguise intact. The night was warm, and the sound of festival preparations filled the air with vibrant energy. Christopher and Sarah were sitting in a quiet corner, a bit away from the hustle and bustle. The stage lights' glow reflected in Sarah's visibly worried eyes. "Chris, I need to tell you something," Sarah began hesitantly. She looked at the ground as if searching for the right words. "Go ahead, Sarah. What's bothering you?" Christopher asked, leaning forward, concerned about her expression. Sarah took a deep breath before continuing. "My ex-boyfriend, Nathan, he's the leader of one of the competing bands. Our relationship ended very badly. He still holds a lot of resentment, and I'm afraid he might try something to hurt me during the festival." Christopher frowned, feeling a twinge of worry in his chest. "What do you mean by hurt?" he asked, trying to stay calm. "Nathan is very competitive. He would do anything to win, including sabotaging my performance." He's done it before, in smaller competitions, Sarah confessed, her voice heavy with sadness. Christopher felt a wave of anger and compassion at the same time. He held Sarah's hand firmly. "Sarah, I promise I'll be by your side. I won't let him hurt you or disrupt your performance. We'll face this together," he said, with a determination that surprised even himself. Sarah looked at Christopher, her eyes shining with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "Thank you, Chris. That means a lot to me," she replied, squeezing his hand. The next day, while helping with stage preparations, Christopher and Sarah noticed Nathan's presence, who was surrounded by some of his band members. He watched them with a cold, calculating look. "Sarah, look who's there," Christopher whispered, discreetly pointing in Nathan's direction. Sarah turned and met Nathan's eyes. A shiver ran down her spine. He smiled arrogantly, as if he had already planned something. "Let's continue our work and ignore him for now. We won't give him the pleasure of knowing we're worried," Sarah said, trying to stay composed. Christopher nodded in agreement and continued adjusting the sound equipment cables. But he couldn't help but feel a growing tension. He knew they needed to be prepared for anything. Later that afternoon, while Christopher and Sarah were backstage, Nathan approached them, his fake smile intact. "Look who we have here. Sarah Thompson and her new little friend," Nathan said sarcastically. Sarah stood up, keeping calm. "What do you want, Nathan?" she asked, her voice firm. "Just wanted to wish you good luck." "You'll need it," he replied, his smile broadening threateningly. Christopher stepped forward, placing himself between Sarah and Nathan. "Let me make something clear, Nathan. We won't tolerate any sabotage or unsportsmanlike behavior. We're here to compete fairly," Christopher said, his gaze fixed on Nathan. Nathan laughed, a cold and humorless sound. "Oh, how cute. The brave new boyfriend. Let's see how long that bravery lasts," he replied before walking away. Christopher and Sarah exchanged a worried but determined look. They knew the battle was just beginning. As the festival progressed, Christopher and Sarah worked together to ensure everything was perfect for Sarah's performance. They reviewed every detail, from the lighting to the instrument setup. The tension between them and Nathan was palpable, but Christopher was determined to keep his promise. One night, while Sarah was rehearsing one of her songs, Nathan appeared again, this time more aggressive. "Do you really think you can win, Sarah? You're just an amateur," he provoked, his voice full of venom. Sarah stopped playing and looked directly at Nathan. "I'm here because I love music. I'm not competing for you or anyone else. If you can't handle that, it's your problem," she replied, her voice firm and unwavering. Christopher, who had been watching closely, approached the stage. "Nathan, that's enough. Leave now before we have to call security," he said, his patience running out. Nathan stepped forward, his face contorted with anger. "You don't know who you're dealing with, man. I won't let her win," he threatened. Before the situation could escalate further, some members of the festival security team intervened, removing Nathan. He left, but the threat in his words lingered in the air. In the following days, Christopher and Sarah increased their precautions. They checked the equipment multiple times and asked trusted friends for help to ensure nothing was tampered with. Their closeness grew even more as they shared their concerns and fears. "Chris, I wouldn't have been able to get through this without you. Thank you for being by my side," Sarah said one night as they rested after another long day of rehearsals. "I couldn't be anywhere else, Sarah. You're amazing, and I'll do everything I can to help you achieve your dream," Christopher replied, holding her hand. Finally, the day of Sarah's performance arrived. The tension in the air was palpable. Christopher was backstage, checking the last details, when he noticed something strange. One of the sound cables was loose, as if it had been tampered with. "Sarah, wait!" he shouted, running to the stage. Sarah, who was about to start, looked at him, surprised. "What is it, Chris?" "Someone tried to sabotage the equipment. We need to fix it before you start," he explained, quickly adjusting the cable. Sarah nodded, her heart pounding. She knew Nathan was behind this, but she wouldn't let him defeat her. With everything finally in order, Sarah began her performance. The music filled the air, captivating the audience. Christopher watched, his heart full of pride and admiration. He knew that, together, they could overcome any obstacle. When the last note echoed in the air, the audience erupted in applause. Sarah smiled, her worries disappearing for a moment. She looked at Christopher, who was clapping fervently, and knew that, regardless of what happened, she had someone she could trust. Backstage, Christopher hugged her tightly. "You were incredible, Sarah. I'm so proud of you," he said, emotionally. Sarah returned the hug, feeling stronger than ever. "Thank you, Chris. And thank you for believing in me," she replied with a sincere smile. As they walked away from the spotlight, both knew that there were still challenges ahead. But together, they were ready to face them, with the certainty that their love and determination would guide them. The rivalry between Sarah and Nathan reached its peak during a critical rehearsal for the festival. The atmosphere was tense, and all the participants could feel the electricity in the air. Sarah was focused, trying to concentrate on her performance, while Nathan, with a malicious look, was plotting something in his mind. The stage was set, and the musicians were tuning their instruments, preparing for another day of intense rehearsals. Sarah was in the middle of her presentation when Nathan decided to act. He walked to the center of the stage and abruptly interrupted the music. "What are you doing, Nathan?" Sarah asked, trying to stay calm. "I'm just trying to ensure everyone has a fair chance," Nathan replied with a sarcastic smile. "You've always been the favorite, Sarah, but that ends here." The tension was palpable. The other participants looked on, curious and uneasy. Christopher, who was backstage, watched the scene with growing concern. He knew he needed to intervene before things got out of control. "Nathan, this isn't fair. We're all here to compete honestly," he said, walking to the stage. Nathan quickly turned to face Christopher, his face contorted with anger. "And who are you to talk about fairness?" Nathan retorted with disdain. "You barely got here and already think you can give lessons?" "I'm not here to give lessons, but I won't stand by while you try to sabotage others," Christopher replied firmly. The argument between the two men drew the attention of Mark Hunter, the investigative journalist at the festival in search of a big story. He watched closely, sensing there was more to Christopher's story than it appeared. Emily, an old rival of Sarah's, was also present and saw an opportunity to benefit from the situation. She had always envied Sarah's talent and now had a trump card. She knew who Christopher really was. Observing the scene, she began to devise a plan to use this information to her advantage. "Let's resolve this civilly," suggested Christopher, trying to calm the situation. "We don't need to turn this into a spectacle." Nathan, however, was unwilling to back down. He stepped forward, invading Christopher's personal space. "You think you can come here, play the hero, and resolve everything with pretty words?" Nathan said, his voice dripping with venom. "You don't know what's at stake for me." Sarah, who had been trying to stay out of the fight, finally decided to intervene. "Nathan, please stop this. We don't need this kind of behavior," she pleaded, trying to appeal to reason. "You've always been the favorite, Sarah. Always had everything handed to you," Nathan shouted, losing complete control. "But I won't let you outdo me this time." The situation was about to explode when Christopher, in a last effort to keep the peace, placed a hand on Nathan's shoulder. "Listen, Nathan, everyone here has dreams and hopes. It's not fair to destroy others to get yours," Christopher said with a conciliatory tone. Nathan, however, wasn't willing to listen. He pushed Christopher hard, almost causing him to lose his balance. "Get out of my way," Nathan shouted. Before the situation could escalate further, the festival organizers intervened, separating the two. Meanwhile, backstage, Mark Hunter watched everything with a calculating look. He had a feeling there was more to Christopher's story than it appeared. Determined to uncover the truth, Mark began to investigate more deeply. In the following days, the tension between Sarah and Nathan continued to grow. She tried to stay focused on her performance, but Nathan's constant pressure and sabotage attempts were beginning to affect her. Christopher, for his part, did everything possible to support her, but his concern about Emily discovering his true identity also tormented him. Emily, always astute, decided it was time to act. She approached Christopher at an opportune moment when he was alone backstage. "Hello, Christopher. Or should I say Chris?" she said with an enigmatic smile. Christopher immediately tensed. He knew there was no point in pretending ignorance. "What do you want, Emily?" he asked, trying to stay composed. I know who you really are. Christopher James, heir to the pharmaceutical fortune, Emily said bluntly. And I'm going to use this information to get rid of Sarah. Christopher felt a chill down his spine. He knew Emily wasn't bluffing. What do you want from me? He asked, trying to buy time. It's simple. Convince Sarah to drop out of the competition, or I'll reveal your true identity to everyone, Emily threatened, her gaze fixed on Christopher. Christopher was faced with a moral dilemma. He knew revealing his true identity could destroy his relationship with Sarah, but he also didn't want to betray her trust by giving in to Emily's demands. He needed to think of a solution, and quickly. Meanwhile, Sarah was increasingly pressured. She knew something was wrong, but couldn't understand what it was. Determined to face her challenges head-on, she prepared for her next performance, trying to ignore Nathan's constant shadow and Emily's insinuations. The situation reached a critical point when Sarah accidentally overheard a conversation between Emily and another participant. She was shocked to discover that Emily was planning to use Christopher's true identity against her. Feeling betrayed and confused, Sarah decided to confront Christopher. We need to talk, Christopher, she said, finding him backstage. Sarah, Christopher began, but was interrupted. I know about Emily. I know she discovered your true identity and is trying to use it against me, Sarah said, her voice trembling with emotion. Why didn't you tell me? Christopher felt the weight of the situation. He knew he needed to be honest with Sarah, but also knew the truth could destroy them. I wanted to tell you, Sarah, but I was afraid of losing you. I disguised myself because I wanted to find someone who loved me for who I am, not for my money, he explained sincerely. Sarah was silent for a moment, processing the information. She knew Christopher had good intentions, but still felt betrayed. I need some time to think, she finally said. I don't know if I can trust you now. Christopher respected her decision, but was determined to prove his love and sincerity. He knew he needed to act quickly, both to protect Sarah and to resolve the emerging problems. Backstage at the festival, intrigues and secrets continued to unfold, while everyone anxiously awaited the next performances. Sarah and Christopher were at a crossroads, and their decisions in the coming days would be crucial in determining their future, both at the festival and in their personal lives. Emily, a cunning and determined rival, had been observing Christopher ever since she discovered his true identity. It wasn't hard for her to notice that there was more to Chris than he let on. She found him alone at the end of an afternoon, after a long day of festival preparations, in which he had stood out for his dedication and hard work. Emily approached with a calculating look and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Can we talk, Chris? She asked, pretending a cordiality that Christopher felt was false. Sure, he replied, unsuspecting of her real intentions. They moved a bit away from the hustle and bustle of the festival, finding a relatively quiet corner behind one of the tents. Christopher felt a chill run down his spine. Something in Emily's look made him uncomfortable. I know who you really are, Christopher James, Emily said abruptly, without preamble. Christopher went pale. He tried to keep his composure, but the impact of the revelation was undeniable. I don't know what you're talking about, he tried to dissemble. Don't play dumb, Emily laughed, a cold and calculating laugh. I know you're the heir to James Pharmaceuticals, and I know you're here pretending to be someone you're not. Christopher swallowed hard. What do you want? It's simple, Emily crossed her arms, her eyes sparkling with malice. I want you to convince Sarah to drop out of the competition. If she doesn't, I'll expose your true identity to everyone here. Just imagine the scandal. Christopher felt the weight of the threat. If Emily revealed his identity, not only would his relationship with Sarah be at risk, but his presence at the festival would be seen as a farce, destroying everything he had built so far. Why are you doing this? He asked, trying to buy time to think. Sarah is a strong competitor. With her out of the way, my chances of winning increase significantly. And, of course, a scandal involving a billionaire heir would be an interesting bonus, Emily explained coldly. Christopher knew he needed to make a decision. He couldn't allow Emily to destroy his relationship with Sarah, but he also knew he couldn't give in to blackmail. This isn't fair, he said, almost pleading. Sarah worked hard to be here. She deserves a fair chance. Well, life isn't fair, Chris, Emily shrugged. You have until tomorrow to convince her to drop out. Otherwise, everyone will know the truth about you." With those words, Emily walked away, leaving Christopher alone with his thoughts. He knew he needed to talk to Sarah, but how could he tell her about his true identity without destroying the trust they had built? That night, Christopher went to the small lodging where Sarah was staying. He felt like a traitor, but knew the truth needed to be told. When he arrived, he found Sarah coming out of the shower, with a relaxed expression that quickly turned to concern upon seeing the seriousness on Christopher's face. "Chris, what happened?" she asked, noticing the tension in his expression. "We need to talk, Sarah." "It's important," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. They sat on the small couch in the lodging, and Christopher began to speak. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been hiding from you." Sarah frowned, confused. "What is it, Chris? You're scaring me." Before Christopher could continue, the door suddenly opened and Emily walked in. She had followed Christopher, ensuring he would fulfill his part of the deal. "Oh, what a touching scene," she said with a sarcastic smile. "Emily, what are you doing here?" Sarah asked, clearly irritated by the intrusion. "I'm here to ensure Christopher tells the truth," Emily replied, crossing her arms. Christopher knew he couldn't delay any longer. "Sarah, my name isn't Chris. My name is Christopher James. I'm the heir to James Pharmaceuticals." Sarah's eyes widened, the surprise and pain clearly visible on her face. "You lied to me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I can explain," Christopher began, but Sarah raised her hand, stopping him. "Why did you do this?" she asked, the hurt evident in her voice. "I wanted to find someone who liked me for who I am, not for my money," Christopher explained, desperate. "I disguised myself as Chris to see if I could find true love." Sarah shook her head, trying to process the information. "And you thought lying to me was the best way to do that?" "I never meant to hurt you, Sarah. I just wanted a chance to be myself, without the weight of my name." Emily, watching the scene with satisfaction, decided to play her last card. "And now that you know the truth, Sarah, what are you going to do? Will you drop out of the competition to spare poor Christopher the scandal?" Sarah looked at Emily, her expression hardening. "I'm not dropping out. I worked hard to get here. And if anyone should leave, it's you, Emily." Emily laughed, but there was a touch of nervousness in her voice. "You think you can take me on?" "I know I can," Sarah replied firmly. "And as for you, Christopher, I need time to process all this. I don't know if I can trust you now." Christopher felt a tightness in his chest, but knew Sarah needed that time. "I understand, Sarah. Just know that my feelings for you are real. I never wanted to hurt you." Sarah didn't respond, just stood up and left the lodging, leaving Christopher and Emily alone. Emily, realizing her plan hadn't gone as expected, decided to leave as well, but not without throwing one last disdainful look at Christopher. Alone, Christopher sat on the couch, feeling the weight of the consequences of his actions. He knew he had a lot to prove, not only to Sarah but to himself. And as the festival's tension continued to grow, he promised himself he would do everything in his power to regain Sarah's trust and expose Emily's true intentions. Everyone's fate at the festival was at stake, and Christopher knew he needed to act wisely and courageously to face the challenges ahead. The next morning, the sun shone timidly through the curtains of the small room Sarah shared with other festival participants. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, still trying to process the avalanche of emotions that had overwhelmed her since the previous night. Discovering that Christopher, or rather Chris, was not who he claimed to be had left her devastated. The man she believed to be a simple worker, someone who shared her struggles and dreams, was actually Christopher James, the heir to one of the country's largest fortunes. The door to the room slowly opened, revealing the weary figure of Christopher. He had spent the night awake, battling anguish and guilt. He knew he needed to talk to Sarah, explain his reasons, and, above all, beg for a second chance. "Sarah," he began, his voice hoarse from rehearsing what he would say. "We need to talk." Sarah raised her eyes, her gaze cold and distant. "What more is there to say, Chris? Or should I say Christopher? You lied to me." "I know, and I deeply regret it," he replied, cautiously approaching. "But please let me explain." She sighed, fighting back the tears threatening to fall. Then explain, Christopher. Explain why you lied to me. Christopher sat in the chair next to the bed, feeling small before the magnitude of Sarah's feelings. I was tired of being seen only as a rich heir. I wanted to find someone who liked me for who I am, not for my money. When I heard about the festival, I saw an opportunity to hide behind an ordinary identity, to live a simple life, even if only for a short period. Sarah interrupted him, her voice trembling with emotion. And you thought it was fair to deceive all of us? Deceive me? No, I didn't think it was fair, he admitted, lowering his head. But knowing you, Sarah, everything changed. You made me realize I didn't need to hide who I was to be loved. You made me want to be a better person, someone worthy of your love. She was silent, absorbing his words. The pain of betrayal was still strong, but there was something in Christopher's sincerity that made her hesitate. You had so many opportunities to tell me the truth, Christopher. Why didn't you? He ran his hands through his hair, frustrated with himself. I was afraid of losing you. Afraid that, upon knowing who I really am, you would walk away. But by lying, you ended up losing me anyway, she said, her words heavy with sadness. Christopher felt a tightness in his heart. I know, and I'm willing to do anything to fix this. Please, give me a chance to prove that my love for you is real. Sarah looked at him, her heart torn between pain and hope. I need time, Christopher. I need to think. He nodded, respecting her request. I understand. I'll be here, waiting for you. As Christopher left the room, Sarah felt a mix of relief and confusion. She knew she needed to focus on the festival and her final performance, but Christopher's constant presence in her mind made everything more difficult. In the days that followed, Sarah tried to focus on her rehearsals, but the tension was palpable. Christopher kept his distance, respecting her space, but his furtive glances and silent gestures of support didn't go unnoticed by her. However, the festival was in its final stretch, and important decisions had to be made quickly. Sarah knew her final performance could decide her future and, despite her heavy heart, she was determined to give her best. On the eve of her presentation, Sarah found herself alone on stage, adjusting the final details. The quietness of the place was a contrast to the storm of emotions inside her. That's when she heard soft footsteps behind her. Sarah, Christopher's voice echoed through the empty theater. I know you asked for time, but there's something I need to say before your presentation. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. What is so important, Christopher? He stepped forward, his eyes fixed on hers. Regardless of what happens between us, I want you to know that I believe in you. I believe in your talent, in your passion. You deserve this scholarship more than anyone here. Sarah felt a lump in her throat, her emotions on edge. Thank you, Christopher. That means a lot to me. He smiled, a sad and hopeful smile at the same time. I'll be here, in the audience, cheering for you. No matter what happens, I'll always be here for you. With those words, he stepped back, leaving Sarah alone on stage. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and felt a new wave of determination. Despite the complications in her personal life, she knew she needed to give her all in that performance. That night, the auditorium was packed. The audience eagerly awaited Sarah's performance, and among them was Christopher, his heart pounding with anxiety and hope. He knew that moment was crucial, not just for Sarah but for both of them. When Sarah took the stage, a wave of applause greeted her. She closed her eyes for a moment, seeking inner strength, and then began her performance. The music filled the auditorium, and her voice, full of emotion and passion, resonated in every corner of the space. Christopher watched with admiration, his heart swelling with pride. He knew that, regardless of what happened between them, Sarah was destined for great things. She was a star, shining brightly on that stage. After the last note, the silence in the auditorium was broken by an explosion of applause and cheers. Sarah opened her eyes, tears of emotion streaming down her face, and took a bow. As the applause continued, she searched for Christopher in the audience and found his eyes fixed on hers, full of love and support. At that moment, she knew that despite the lies and complications, there was something genuine and real between them, something worth exploring and perhaps forgiving. With a lighter heart, Sarah made a promise to herself. She would give Christopher the chance to prove his love and regain her trust. After all, true love was rare and worth fighting for, even in the face of adversity. And so, as the music festival came to an end, Sarah and Christopher knew that their journeys were just beginning. Together, they would face the challenges that lay ahead, with the hope of a better and more honest future. As Sarah prepared for her final performance at the New Orleans Music Festival, the tension in the air was palpable. She knew that Nathan and Emily were determined to sabotage her, but her passion for music and her desire to win the competition kept her focused. However, she couldn't help but feel the absence of Christopher, who had distanced himself since the revelation of his true identity. Christopher, for his part, was determined to protect Sarah at all costs. Despite the tension between them, he couldn't let Nathan and Emily ruin Sarah's dream. One quiet night, Christopher was hiding backstage, trying to listen for any suspicious conversations. It was then that he heard Nathan and Emily planning a final attack. "Nathan, we have to make sure Sarah doesn't get on stage tomorrow," Emily whispered, looking around to ensure no one was listening. "Don't worry, Emily," Nathan replied with a malicious tone. "I already have a plan. During the soundcheck, we'll sabotage her equipment. She won't stand a chance." Christopher felt a chill down his spine. He knew he needed to act fast, but before he could leave to warn Sarah, he was intercepted by Mark Hunter, the investigative journalist who had been following a lead on unethical practices in the pharmaceutical industry. "Christopher, or should I call you Chris?" Mark asked with a penetrating look. "We have a lot to talk about." "Mark, now is not a good time," Christopher responded, trying to break free. "Actually, it's the perfect time," Mark insisted, holding Christopher's arm. "I'm investigating your family and have evidence of unethical practices that could destroy your company's reputation. I think you should listen to me." Christopher felt a crushing weight on his shoulders. He was torn between protecting Sarah and facing his family's problems. He decided he needed to confess everything to Mark, hoping to expose the truth and perhaps redeem his family. "Mark, I confess," Christopher began with a tone of resignation. "My family has dark secrets, and I want to help expose them. But right now, there's something more urgent I need to address. Sarah is in danger." Mark, surprised by Christopher's sincerity, hesitated for a moment. "All right, we'll deal with this later. Go help Sarah." With Mark's permission, Christopher ran to Sarah, who was backstage, adjusting her costume for the final performance. "Sarah, wait," Christopher called, breathless. Sarah turned to him, surprised to see him. "Christopher, what are you doing here?" "We don't have much time," he said, trying to catch his breath. "Nathan and Emily are planning to sabotage your performance. They're going to mess with your equipment during the sound check." Sarah turned pale but quickly composed herself. "Thank you for warning me. What are we going to do?" "I'll keep an eye on things backstage and make sure they don't touch anything. You just need to focus on your performance," Christopher replied, determination in his eyes. Sarah nodded, feeling a new wave of courage. "Okay, let's do this." As Sarah prepared to take the stage, Christopher positioned himself strategically backstage, watching every move Nathan and Emily made. He saw when Nathan tried to approach Sarah's equipment and immediately intervened. "Nathan, I know what you're trying to do. It ends now," Christopher said firmly. Nathan laughed, trying to maintain his composure. "You think you can stop me, Chris? Or should I call you Christopher James, the heir to the pharmaceutical industry?" Christopher didn't back down. "I don't care what you know about me. I won't let you ruin Sarah's chance." Nathan, realizing Christopher wasn't bluffing, backed off with a look of contempt. "This isn't over, Chris." Meanwhile, Sarah took the stage, determined to give the best performance of her life. The music started, and she poured herself into it, every note filled with emotion and passion. The audience was mesmerized, and even the judges seemed impressed. On the other side of the stage, Emily was about to publicly reveal Christopher's true identity. She took the stage with a microphone in hand, interrupting Sarah's performance. "I have something important to say," Emily began with a triumphant smile. "Christopher James, the heir to the pharmaceutical industry, is among us, disguised as an ordinary man." Before she could continue, Mark Hunter entered the scene, holding documents in his hand. Emily, Your attempt to expose Christopher is insignificant compared to what really matters. I'm investigating unethical practices in Christopher's family's pharmaceutical company, and I have proof to expose everything." The audience murmured in shock, and all eyes turned to Christopher. He took the stage, next to Sarah, and grabbed the microphone. "It's true," Christopher began with a serious tone. "I am Christopher James, and I disguised myself to find genuine love. But tonight is not about me. It's about Sarah and her incredible talent." Sarah, with tears in her eyes, took the microphone. "And I love Christopher, not for what he has, but for the man he is." When everything seemed to be falling apart, Nathan, remorseful for his actions, decided to confess his own mistakes. He took the stage and grabbed the microphone from Sarah's hands. "I was responsible for trying to sabotage Sarah and Christopher," Nathan confessed, with a remorseful tone. "I manipulated information and lied to win the competition. I apologize to everyone, especially to you, Sarah." The audience fell silent, absorbing Nathan's confession. The judges, impressed with Sarah's integrity and Christopher's sincerity, decided to award her the scholarship. At the end of the festival, Sarah received the scholarship she had longed for, and Christopher promised to reform his family's company, committing to ethical practices. Sarah and Christopher realized that, despite the adversities, their love was strong enough to overcome any obstacle. "We're in this together, Sarah," Christopher said, holding her hand. "We'll face everything together." Sarah smiled, feeling stronger than ever. "Yes, Christopher. Together, we can overcome anything." And so, the music festival not only transformed Sarah's life, but also brought truth and redemption to Christopher. Together, they were ready to face the future, knowing their love was genuine and unshakable. Mark Hunter was sitting in a busy cafe in New Orleans, analyzing the documents he had gathered over the past few weeks. The evidence was all there, in black and white. The James family's pharmaceutical company was involved in unethical practices that could cause a major scandal. He knew confronting Christopher with this information would be risky, especially considering the heir's disguise at the music festival. But Mark also knew this was his chance to expose the truth and bring justice. Elsewhere in the city, Christopher was dealing with his own worries. After the tense discussion with Sarah and Nathan and Emily's constant sabotage attempts, he was exhausted. However, he couldn't ignore Mark's call for an urgent meeting. He knew the journalist was digging deep, but had no idea how close he was to discovering the truth. Christopher arrived at the cafe on time. He spotted Mark sitting at an isolated table, with a stack of papers in front of him. Sitting down, he tried to appear calm, but his mind was in turmoil. "Thanks for coming, Chris." Mark began the conversation with a serious tone. "Or should I call you Christopher James?" Christopher felt a chill down his spine. "Mark, I can explain." Mark raised his hand, interrupting him. "I'm not here to hear excuses, Christopher. I'm here to discuss the facts. And the facts show that your family's company is involved in highly unethical practices. People are suffering because of it." Christopher felt the weight of Mark's words. He knew his family wasn't perfect, but never imagined things were so bad. I didn't know things were like this. I haven't been directly involved in the family business for years." Mark looked intently at Christopher. "That may be true, but you're still a James, and you have the responsibility to do something about it. I have enough evidence to expose everything publicly, but before I do that, I want to hear what you have to say." Christopher took a deep breath. "If you're expecting me to defend my family's actions, that's not going to happen. I don't agree with unethical practices. If what you're saying is true, then something needs to be done. But I need time to fully understand the situation." Mark shook his head. "Time is a luxury you don't have, Christopher. The festival is ending, and people need to know the truth. I need your statement to move forward with my investigation." Christopher was torn. He knew exposing his family could have devastating consequences, but he also knew the truth needed to come out. "Mark, I'll cooperate with you, but I need a guarantee that Sarah won't be involved in this. She has nothing to do with my family's actions and is already going through a lot." Mark nodded. "I understand. Sarah is an innocent person in all this. My investigation is focused on your family, not her. I promise not to involve her name." The two men exchanged a look of understanding. Christopher knew he was doing the right thing, but that didn't make the decision any easier. He spent the next few hours providing Mark with all the information he had about his family's company, hoping it would help expose the truth and eventually bring justice. Meanwhile, Sarah was rehearsing for her final performance. She was determined to give her best, despite all the chaos around her. Nathan and Emily wouldn't give up easily, but she wasn't willing to let them ruin her dream. After his meeting with Mark, Christopher found Sarah on stage, rehearsing with all her heart. He knew he needed to tell her about his conversation with Mark, but seeing her so focused and determined gave him pause. He didn't want to destabilize her any more than she already was. "Sarah," he called softly, approaching her. She stopped singing and turned to him with a tired and sad expression. "Christopher, I don't know if I'm ready to talk right now." "I understand," he said, trying to be understanding, "but there's something you need to know. I talked to Mark Hunter, the journalist. He has evidence against my family's company, and I decided to cooperate with him." Sarah looked at him, surprised. "You did that?" "Yes," Christopher confirmed. "I can't keep hiding the truth. People have the right to know what's going on. And I want you to know that I did it thinking of you too. I asked Mark to ensure you're not involved." Sarah took a deep breath, processing the information. "I appreciate that, Christopher. But the truth is, regardless of what happens with your family, we both need to face our own battles. I have my performance, and you have your responsibility." Christopher nodded. "I know, and I want you to know that I'm here to support you, no matter what happens." The two exchanged a look of understanding and respect. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, but they were determined to face it together, even if it meant facing painful truths and unexpected challenges. The next day, the festival was in its final stretch. The tension in the air was palpable. Sarah was ready for her performance, and Christopher was in the audience, his heart pounding. He knew that moment was crucial, not just for Sarah but for both of them. As Sarah took the stage, Mark Hunter was backstage, ready to reveal his findings after the performance. He knew the truth needed to come out, but he also knew that moment belonged to Sarah. Sarah began to sing, her voice filling the space with a passion and sincerity that touched everyone present. The audience was mesmerized, and Christopher felt a wave of pride and admiration for her. When the performance ended, the audience erupted in applause. Sarah was radiant but also nervous, knowing the moment of truth was approaching. Mark took the stage, holding the documents that contained the evidence against Christopher's family. He looked at the audience and began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, there's something very important I need to share with you." Before he could continue, Emily tried to interrupt, but Christopher took the stage and spoke up. "I am Christopher James," he announced, feeling the weight of his words, "and I have something to confess about my family's company." The audience fell silent, waiting for what would happen next. Christopher began to explain everything he knew, while Mark confirmed his findings. The truth was finally coming out. Meanwhile, Nathan, remorseful for his actions, mustered the courage to take the stage. "I also have something to confess," he said, his voice full of remorse. "I sabotaged Sarah and manipulated information to harm both her and Christopher. I was wrong, and I am truly sorry." Nathan's confession shocked the audience, but it also brought a sense of justice. Sarah and Christopher faced the audience together, feeling that, despite all the adversities, they were on the right path. In the end, Sarah received the scholarship she had long desired, and Christopher promised to reform his family's company, committing to ethical practices. They knew the love they shared was strong enough to overcome any obstacle, and they were ready to face the future together, with truth and justice on their side. At the height of the festival, the tension was in the air, and the atmosphere was electrifying. Sarah was backstage, adjusting her costume and focusing on the performance that could change her life. She knew the final presentation was crucial, not just to win the scholarship, but to prove to herself that she was capable of overcoming any adversity. As she did breathing exercises to calm down, her thoughts turned to Christopher. The revelation of his true identity still weighed on her mind, but she tried to push those worries away, focusing on the music. Christopher, on the other hand, was in the audience, watching Sarah's every move with a mix of pride and anxiety. He knew how much that performance meant to her and how hard she had worked to get there. He also knew about Nathan and Emily's sabotage attempts and was on high alert to protect her. "You can do it, Sarah," Christopher murmured to himself as he watched her prepare to take the stage. The music began, and Sarah stepped onto the stage with a magnetic presence. Her voice resonated through the auditorium, capturing the audience's attention. Every note, every movement, was filled with emotion and passion. It was as if Sarah was telling her own story through the music, and the audience was completely engaged. As Sarah shone on stage, Emily, backstage, was determined to expose Christopher. With a malicious smile, she took the microphone from one of the stage assistants and began addressing the audience. "Attention, everyone." Emily's voice echoed through the auditorium, interrupting Sarah's performance. "I have an important revelation to make about one of the festival participants." The auditorium fell silent, and all eyes turned to Emily. Christopher felt a chill down his spine and began to stand up, ready to intervene. However, before Emily could continue, Mark Hunter entered the scene, taking the microphone from her hands. "This isn't about the festival, Emily," Mark said firmly. "I have an investigation to reveal, but it's not about Christopher. It's about unethical practices in the pharmaceutical industry of the James family." The audience murmured, confused and curious. Sarah, on stage, looked at Christopher, her eyes expressing a mix of shock and understanding. Christopher stood up and made his way to the stage, determined to face the situation head-on. "It's true," Christopher began, taking the microphone. "My name is Christopher James, and I disguised myself as Chris to find genuine love. But tonight isn't about me. It's about Sarah and her incredible talent." He paused, looking directly into Sarah's eyes. "Sarah, I lied about my identity, but my feelings for you are real. I never wanted to hurt you. I was trying to escape a life full of superficiality and find something true." The audience remained silent. Sarah, still processing everything, took a deep breath and approached Christopher. "I'm still hurt, Chris, or Christopher, whatever I should call you," she said, her voice trembling. "But this isn't the time or place to discuss this. I need to finish my performance." The audience applauded, encouraging her to continue. Christopher stepped back, giving her space to resume her performance. She refocused, and the music began again. This time, her voice seemed even more powerful, charged with the emotions of the moment. As Sarah sang, Emily, frustrated that her plan had been foiled, tried to leave discreetly. However, Mark intercepted her, determined to maintain order and expose the truth. "Emily, you're not going anywhere," Mark said firmly. "You tried to sabotage Sarah and Christopher, and that won't go unpunished." In the midst of the commotion, Nathan, who had been observing everything, felt a pang of conscience. He knew his actions had harmed Sarah and needed to make things right. He stood up and made his way to the stage, taking the microphone. "I have something to say," Nathan began, his voice filled with regret. "I was the one who manipulated information and tried to sabotage Sarah and Christopher. I was jealous and let it consume me. I apologize to everyone, especially you, Sarah." The audience was shocked by Nathan's confession. Sarah, finishing her performance, looked at him with a mix of surprise and relief. "Thank you, Nathan," she said sincerely. "I hope you find peace with yourself." Sarah's performance was an absolute success. The audience gave a standing ovation, and the judges were visibly impressed. In the end, she was announced as the festival winner and received the coveted scholarship. Christopher, still in the audience, felt a wave of relief and happiness seeing Sarah being recognized for her talent and dedication. He knew he still had a lot to explain and resolve with her, but at that moment, all that mattered was her success. After the award ceremony, Sarah and Christopher met backstage. Christopher approached her with a serious and sincere look. "Sarah, I know I was wrong to lie to you," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "But my feelings are true. I want to be by your side and support you in everything. Please, give me a chance to prove it." Sarah looked at him, her eyes reflecting the internal battle she was fighting. She knew Christopher had lied, but she also saw the sincerity in his eyes and remembered all the genuine moments they shared. "Christopher, I need time to process all this," she replied with a sigh. But I believe you truly care about me. Let's take it one step at a time. Christopher nodded, accepting her decision. I'll be here whenever you're ready, he promised. As the festival came to an end, Sarah and Christopher knew they still had challenges ahead. However, they were determined to face those challenges together, strengthened by the love and sincerity they found in each other. When everything seemed to be falling apart, Sarah and Christopher found themselves before an audience eager for answers. The accumulated revelations and tensions throughout the festival had created a dense atmosphere, charged with expectations and uncertainties. Sarah, still feeling the weight of betrayal and lies, looked at Christopher, seeking a sign that everything could be resolved. Christopher, for his part, took a deep breath. He knew this was a decisive moment, not only for his relationship with Sarah, but also for his integrity and future. He squeezed Sarah's hand, feeling the need to convey some reassurance. Sarah, Christopher began. But before he could continue, Nathan appeared on stage, interrupting him. The audience murmured in surprise and curiosity. Nathan, visibly remorseful, raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. Wait, everyone. I need to confess something, Nathan said, his voice trembling but determined. I was the one who manipulated information and tried to sabotage Sarah and Christopher. I was the one who made terrible mistakes out of pride and jealousy. The audience's murmur grew, and Sarah felt a mix of relief and confusion. She looked at Nathan, trying to understand his motivations. Nathan, why? She asked, still trying to process everything. I was angry, Sarah. I couldn't accept the end of our relationship and let my pride blind me. But seeing you two together, I realized how wrong I was. I can't continue with this lie, Nathan said, his voice laden with regret. Emily, who was in the audience, tried to intervene but was stopped by Mark Hunter, the investigative journalist. Mark, holding a microphone, approached the stage. Emily, your attempt to expose Christopher was only a distraction. My investigation is focused on your family's unethical practices, Christopher, not on your relationship with Sarah, Mark announced, showing the documents he had gathered. Christopher took a deep breath and, with Sarah's support, decided to face the truth head-on. It's true. My name is Christopher James, and my family has a pharmaceutical empire. But I'm here as Chris, a man who fell in love with Sarah and wanted to find genuine love, he said, his voice steady and sincere. The audience was silent, absorbing the information. Sarah, feeling the strength of Christopher's words, held his hand firmly. And despite everything, I believe in him, Sarah said, her voice full of conviction. Christopher made mistakes, but he's here to fix them, and I'm willing to give him a chance. The audience applauded, and Sarah and Christopher felt a wave of relief and hope. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, but they were ready to face it together, strengthened by the love and sincerity they found in each other. As the festival came to an end, Sarah received the scholarship she had longed for, and Christopher promised to reform his family's company, committing to ethical practices. They knew the love they shared was strong enough to overcome any obstacle, and they were ready to face the future together, with truth and justice on their side. In the end, Sarah and Christopher found that, despite the challenges and adversities, true love could overcome any barrier. They faced the difficulties together and emerged stronger, ready to build a future based on mutual respect, sincerity, and love. And so, the music festival not only transformed Sarah's life, but also brought truth and redemption to Christopher. Together, they were ready to face the challenges ahead, knowing their love was genuine and unshakable.